All right, so subjective and objective evaluations, part 2. So when we think about how it is we evaluate, typically we lump and understand evaluations, and many of you have probably heard these terms in the past. Subjective and objective evaluations. Now, the way that we kind of understand these evaluations are going to be determinative of various facts, various ways that perhaps we feel about a particular thing, and how we then associate what kind of evaluation we are making. Now, we'll start with, let's see here. We'll start with objective evaluations, and I think they might be a little trickier to investigate. So objective evaluations, most easily understood, are those types of evaluations that have some sort of generalized agreement. Some sort of generalized agreement insofar as there is a standard of measurement by which whatever it is that's being evaluated, where the focus is on the object, as you see in the lecture notes, that there's a standard of measurement by which that object can be measured. And in particular, that we will have some sort of generalized agreement as it relates to that particular thing. So, an example of an objective evaluation, and I think I have this, on the back side here, right? This focus on perhaps synchronized swimming. I've never synchronized swum. I think that's how you, I don't know, that's gotta be it, right? I've never synchronized swum. And I've watched it in the Olympics. And it seems really, really difficult. I'm going to upload a video just of synchronized swimming because I think it's really fascinating. I think you all should watch it just to kind of address and exemplify how it is and what it is I mean by just objectively evaluating something. That if we think about the Olympics, we think about any sort of Olympic contest, and you can think about synchronized swimming, you can think about gymnastics, you can think about the high jump, the long jump, anything really. Right? That you have a panel of judges that all have pieces of papers or books or something, right? That they have to measure what it is that's being evaluated. For instance, when the synchronized swimmer's feet come out of the water, are their toes pointed? Are they all straight? Are they all, at the same height? Are they all up for the same amount of length of time? All of these things by which will be evaluated in an objective, unbiased way. That there's a standard of measurement by which all of the judges are measuring, engaging, and engaging with that object. Right? Similarly, perhaps a better example than synchronized swimming is the long jump or the high jump. Right? That all competitors have the same playing field, and there's a standard of measurement. We'll go with the long jump, right? Where they have to take off at a particular place along the track, and the standard of measurement is whoever jumps furthest wins. That there's no disputing that. That it would be really, really nonsensical for a panel of judges to sit there and watch the long jump, right? And everybody jumps 5 feet 5 inches, and then your last competitor goes and jumps 6 feet 2 inches. It would be really, really nonsensical and against kind of how we understand these types of evaluations if all the judges were like, no, even though you jumped 6 feet and 2 inches, one of the people that jumped 5 feet 5 inches, they win. Right? That doesn't make any sense. And so when we think about objective evaluations, there seems to be a standard of measurement by which, something is being measured, the object being measured. There's generalized agreement by a panel of judges, by a panel of professionals, by just a collective. And ultimately, there's not going to be much room for error. Similarly, there are probably a multitude of examples of objective evaluations, not only in sport, but also perhaps, in school, where you would hope that, when I'm grading you all, or when you have classes that you're being graded, that there's some sort of standard measurement by which you are all being graded equally, right? And I give the example that, when I teach live versions of this class, it would, again, be really unfair, it would seem, if I were to say, oh, well, I really liked Jeremy's shirt today. I'm going to probably give him an A, right? That doesn't make any sense. Rather, I need to be impartial. I need to follow the standard of measurement by which I am engaging with that particular object, be it a test, an assignment, a paper, whatever. And so when we think about objective evaluations, right, it's, excuse me, it seems as if they hold more truth, right? They hold more kind of, there's not much room for error. That if something is objectively true, objectively the case, it's hard to argue otherwise. Okay? That it would be, this is a red water bottle. Okay? It's very dinged up. I've had it for nearly 4 years. And as you can see, it's a little rough. Also, I'm going to use this red water bottle in multiple examples, so it'll start making an appearance. Because red water bottles are actually philosophically useful tools. So, anyway. But objectively, if arguably we can all see color, and if I were to hold this up and I were to ask all of us, if we were in a classroom together and I were to say, what color is this? It's red. Right? That we would probably all collectively agree, given what it is we understand of colors, what it is we understand of a color spectrum, that pretty objectively we can claim that to be a red water bottle. Right? And just how we kind of, again, the standard of measurement on the color spectrum, that various colors have various labels, and this seemingly seems to exemplify and relate to the color red. That there's not much discrepancy for this to perhaps be objectively red. Now, where it gets a little tricky is, let's say, right, we have the red water bottle, but somebody says, well, it looks orange to me. It doesn't look red. So then when we have that, is it really objectively red? And so when we start to think about objective evaluations, where we hear claims all of the time, I would argue, about objective truth, objective knowledge, objective truth insofar as it relates to a particular thing. Okay. Well, what about when we do have that voice of dissension, that voice of perhaps alternative perspective? Okay. All right. So objective evaluations, to understand them, to think about them, that little 3 bullet point on the front page there of standards do not depend on the individual evaluator, right? It's not how I feel. If I were judging the Olympic contest, right, even if I really liked the person that jumped 5 feet 5 inches, doesn't matter, right? As impartial as possible, following the standard of measurement, the books, the guidelines, etc., by which to engage with that object. The focus is not on me. The focus is on the object being evaluated. And there's a tendency towards generalized agreement, that the panel of judges, the crowd, etc., recognizes that ultimately the person that jumped 6 feet 2 inches, they are the clear winner. Because there's no discrepancy. Okay. Excuse me. All right, so subjective evaluations. Much, much more easy. Subjective evaluations are personal opinion. They're matters of opinion. They are the type of evaluations that we do all of the time, that we make on a day-to-day basis. This shirt, subjective evaluation. I like this shirt. It's comfy, shows the school where I work at, where I earned my master's from. Right? I like this shirt. I've had it for a couple of years. It's a little nostalgic now, but it's mainly just comfortable. I like it. That's a subjective evaluation. I had a bagel this morning. Subjective evaluation. It was good. Right? The dinner I had last night, it was okay. That's an evaluation. And so when we think about subjective evaluations, we can kind of just understand them in terms, and you can see this on the back. There's not much really to delve wildly deep into here. Just because subjective evaluations, standards directly stem from the individual. Right? How I feel about a particular thing, and as that relates then to my outward experience in the world. That ultimately I feel this about a particular thing, I feel that about a particularly other thing, and from there, right, I live my life. And we all have various opinions. And this should be not a very revolutionary thing to say, right? That it's very clear, given our current political system, our social system, etc., we all have very different opinions about a lot of different subjects. Insofar as it relates to, and I have in here taste. Taste is a really, really, really good example. Okay? That we can all go to a restaurant. I don't think I mentioned, but I do manage a restaurant in town, in Moscow, so maybe you'll see me around. We can all go to a restaurant. We can all order the same dish. And the experience that we're going to have with that dish is going to vary from person to person. That the experience of having the experience of eating that, of engaging with whatever it is that we're eating, we're all going to have very different opinions on whether we like it, whether we dislike it, why we dislike it, and from there, right, we're going to make various determinations. That if I were to say, well, this dish is the best dish, it's so good. It's so good. Right? What I'm saying is that I think it's so good. And to claim any sort of objectivity, to claim any sort of actual definitive truth about the matter, seems a bit reckless. It seems like it would be a bit naive for me to think that as well. Right? Because we're all having very different experiences, we're all having very different perspectives with regards to that meal. Now, and this is where it gets interesting, and we'll tie it kind of into ethics. When we think about subjective and objective evaluations, how then does it change if I were then a food critic? Right? A respected individual that writes for newspapers, blogs, etc. I travel around, I eat various dishes, and I write things about these dishes that I have. That if I were to go around, I were to taste this, that, and the other, and I would say, well, this was a really great meal. This was a really great burger. This is a really great mac and cheese, meatloaf, filet, whatever the case may be. Right? And thinking about, if I were to write about them, some sort of weight is put on what I know. And people might take what it is I say more objectively. So what's happening here? Right? And this is an interesting thing to key in on. That when we think about subjective and objective evaluations, sometimes the line becomes very unclear on how to understand them. That if I have a background in food, if I have a background in wine, something like that, and I start writing about them, and I become respected in my field, then how then does that translate to how you, the reader, the viewer, perhaps engages with that article? To say, oh, well, Bryce said this about this meatloaf, that meatloaf. It must be good. Really, I'm a subjective individual. I'm a subjective being. So isn't my perspective still subjective? Now, how this translates to ethics then, and I'm sure that some of you can see where this is going. But in ethics and ethical discourse, we hear all of the time that this action is right, this action is wrong. This action is permissible, this action is impermissible. This action is good, this action is bad. Those are all evaluative terms. Abortion is impermissible, full stop. Abortion is permissible, full stop. Right? Those are claims that are evaluative claims. And arguably, many people would think that they are objective. It is objectively the case objectively the case that abortion is wrong. Or it is objectively the case that abortion is permissible. Now think about that for a second. Think about all of these kind of guiding principles in our lives that we probably hold near and dear, and we're like, well, it's just the right way to live. It's the right thing, right way to do things. If I were to start pressing further and say, well, why? Well, my religion tells me to, or my society says so. My parents told me to. all of these focuses perhaps on some sort of authority, some sort of group of people that we look up to. But to that extent, how objective is that? Especially when there's perhaps an alternative, equally plausible position. For instance, the abortion debate, or any sort of hot-button issue. Right? If I were to stand up and say, well, abortion is wrong, objectively, I have the truth, I have the knowledge, I know that to be the case. But right across the line, right across the street, somebody else, abortion is permissible. Right? Objectively the case, it is fine, it is permissible. Well, what's happening here? We have this kind of focus, this at least veiled perspective of objectivity. But really, is it just subjective? And then the question ultimately becomes, with ethics, morality, is there any sense of objective morality? Objective ethical principles? And many religions would claim yes, right? That God gives us this way to live. But if it's still interpreted by humans, aren't we just still left in subjectivity? And this is a really, really challenging question, because I would maintain that most of us, including myself, would like to believe we are right in what it is we think, because otherwise we wouldn't think it. But we are right in what it is we think and what it is we understand as good, bad, right, wrong, permissible, impermissible. Well, where did those standards come from? Where did those standards come from? And in particular, are they really not as objective as we think they are? And so when we start to make our transition into our ethical theories, which we're going to start doing this week, keeping this discussion in mind is of utmost importance. And I think it's next week, or maybe in 2 weeks, we'll investigate a Scottish philosopher named David Hume, and then a German-Prussian philosopher named Immanuel Kant, who's going to kind of tease out this distinction all the more. So for the rest of the day, and as you kind of look at your assignment for today, the essay is about goodness. The essay is about, who is a good person and why. Why would you claim them a good person? What are the characteristics of being good? And thinking about it in terms of this conversation, of this video, with regards to how we understand and evaluate what it means to be good. Is there any sense of objectivity when it means to be good? Is there any sense of or is it merely just subjective? I hope that this is interesting to you. I think that this is really, really fascinating. This notion of objectivity and subjectivity as it relates to morality. Because arguably, many of us are raised in such a way where there is an objective right way to live. But is there? Or is it just subjective? Putting together piece by piece, day by day, with all these various changing views, changing perspectives, changing possibilities. Something worthy of investigation. See you all tomorrow.